Hey y'all. So I'm back with John G. Patton, missionary to the New Hebrides, an autobiography. I want to read to you from chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called Our Forebears, and it's where he's laying out some background about his dad, James Patton, and his mom, Janet Rogerson at this time, but will be obviously Janet Patton. And just some interesting things about them that you can see here. Again, I want you to be encouraged by his parents. Some of this is just a fun read, but there's little insights as you read it into some character stuff, some things that are worth imitating as we think about the way we want our children looking back and reflecting on us when they're old. And that's exactly what we have here. We've got an older John Paton as a missionary, reflecting back, looking back, and thinking about his family, about his mom and his dad. He said this about his mom. From such a home came our mother, Janet Jardine Rogerson, a bright-hearted, high-spirited, patient, toiling, and altogether heroic little woman, who for about 43 years made and kept such a wholesome, independent, God-fearing, and self-reliant life for her family of 5 sons and 6 daughters, as constrains me when I look back on it now, in the light of all I've since seen and known of others far differently situated, almost to worship her memory. So obviously he looks back with a lot of fondness on his mom. Makes me think of Proverbs 31 about that virtuous woman, that virtuous wife, and her children will rise up and cause her blessed. So sisters who are mothers, press on and training up these children for the glory of Christ. As you keep reading it, it goes on to talk about a time, and it's really laying out how Janet, his mother, met James, his father. And it's a time whenever she went to go live with her aunt and uncle in another village. And they live in Scotland, and this aunt and uncle was known by everybody in the town to be Old Adam and Eve. That's what they called them, Old Adam and Eve. So she went to go live with Old Adam and Eve, her uncle and her aunt. And this kind of lays out some things that how they met. Like I said, this is kind of just interesting, but there's some little insights here and there that I think should be an encouragement to how we want to live life in front of our children. So it says, one thing that arrested her attention. She had noticed that a young stocking maker from the Brig Inn, James Patton, the son of William and Janet there, was in the habit of stealing alone into the quiet wood, book in hand, day after day at certain hours, as if for private study and meditation. It was a very excusable curiosity that led the young bright heart of the girl to watch him devoutly reading and hear him reverently reciting, though she knew not then it was Ralph Erskine's gospel sonnets, which he could say by heart 60 years afterwards as he lay on his bed of death. And finally, that curiosity awed itself into a holy respect when she saw him lay aside his broad Scotch bonnet, kneeling down under the sheltering wings of some tree, and pour out all his soul in daily prayers to God. As yet, they had never spoken. And so I love that. So, she is living with old Adam and Eve, her uncle and aunt, and she is really curious about this young man she keeps seeing slip off into the woods. And he's going there, and one of the things it says he has is Ralph Erskine's gospel sonnets. I actually have a copy of it here. This man was a man who wrote these gospel sonnets or poems or hymns in the 1600s, and he could recite these. It says even when he was on his deathbed, he could recite these sonnets. They're just praise and worship to God. And so she would see him out there, and her curiosity, it says, it turned into a great respect for this man as she saw him, kneel down, lay aside his bonnet. That sounds like a very tough word, but it's just hat. Lay aside his hat and begin to call out to the Lord in prayer. And she saw that, and it built respect in her. And so this is the second, as think about John Paton remembering his dad. And so far, the first thing that we see is he's remembering that secret closet he used to slip away and go into, and the kids would tiptoe by because he's meeting with God in there. And now we're hearing a story about the first time he met his mother is another situation where he's slipping away off into the woods to meet with God, to be alone with God. And just thinking about these are the things that are seared on the memory of John Paton as an older man, thinking about his dad. And I think that should be an encouragement to us. Again, Proverbs 20 verse 7, a righteous man walks in his integrity and his children are blessed after him. His dad seemed to be a man, and his mom, of integrity that walked with God, and that stood out to him. And then specifically that idea of getting alone with God and enjoying being in the secret place with God. Matthew 6:6 says, when you pray, go into your room, and when you shut the door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And this seemed like a man that loved to do that, to get alone in the secret place and seek God. And this had a big effect, not only on as we'll find out in a minute, him gaining a wife, but also had a huge effect on his son, the missionary, years later. So brothers and sisters, let's be those that live that out in front of our kids, that they would grow up seeing parents that know what it is to get alone in a secret place and seek God. Now, the rest of this, again, there's some sweet things to see that I think are instructional, but for the most part, it's just sort of an enjoying read, almost funny, the way his mom and his dad met. So let me finish reading out this chapter. What spirit moved her? Let lovers tell. Was it all devotion? Or was it a touch of unconscious love kindling in her towards the yellow-haired and thoughtful youth? Or was there a stroke of mischief, of that teasing which so often opens up the door to the most serious step in all our lives? Anyhow, one day she slipped in quietly, stole away his bonnet, and hung it on a branch nearby. So you imagine, he would take off his hat, set it aside, and begin to pray. Well, one day she slips in and grabs the hat and without him knowing, and hangs it on a branch nearby. While his trance of devotion made him oblivious of all around, then from a safe retreat she watched and enjoyed his perplexity in seeking for and finding it. A second day this was repeated, but his manifest disturbance of mind and his long pondering with the bonnet in hand, as if almost alarmed, seemed to touch another chord in her heart, that chord of pity. Pity, which is so often the prelude of love, that finer pity that grieves to wound anything nobler or tenderer than ourselves. Next day, when he came to his accustomed place of prayer, a little card was pinned against the tree just where he had knelt, and on it were these words: "She who stole away your bonnet is ashamed of what she did. She has a great respect for you and asks you to pray for her that she may become as good a Christian as you." Staring long at that writing, he forgot Ralph Erskine for one day. Taking down the card and wondering who the writer could be, he was abusing himself for his stupidity and not suspecting that someone had discovered his retreat and removed his bonnet, instead of wondering whether angels had been there during his prayer. When suddenly raising his eyes, he saw in front of old Adam's cottage, through a lane amongst the trees, the passing of another kind of angel, swinging a milk pail in her hand and merrily singing some snatch of old Scottish song. He knew in that moment, by divine instinct, as infallible as any voice that ever came to a seer of old, that she was the angel visitor who had stolen in upon his retreat. That bright-faced, clever-witted niece of old Adam and Eve, to whom he had never yet spoken, but whose praises he had often heard said and sung, wee Jen. I'm afraid he did pray for her in more senses than one after that afternoon. At any rate, more than a Scotch bonnet was very effectually stolen, a good heart and true was there virtually bestowed, and the trust was never regretted on either side and never betrayed. Often and often in the genuine beautiful hours of the autumn tide of their long life, have I heard my dear father tease Jen about her maidenly intentions in the stealing of that bonnet, and often have heard her quick mother wit and the happy retort that had his motives for coming to that retreat been altogether exclusively pious, he would have probably found his way to the other side of the wood. But that men who prowled about the Garden of Eden ran the risk of meeting someday with a daughter of Eve. I think that's neat at the end. So, you've got this interesting story of how they met and how she comes in and kind of playfully steals away his hat but feels bad for it, writes him a note, and they end up meeting. But then I love this memory of John Paton years later, that he remembers his mom and dad almost just teasing each other over that situation, playfully. You just get this picture of them playfully enjoying each other. And I love that. I think about the scriptures, in God's word that say things like, it calls us to enjoy the wife of our youth, to live happily with the wife of our youth. And you get that sweet picture of, that's the kind of home he raised in, where you had this sweet story of their meeting and them even lovingly picking and playing about it. I hope this is an encouragement to you, and pray that it helps us in our family religion.